George Galloway and the mother of all talk shows. Welcome to the Open University of the Airwaves with George Galloway.
Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. We have an emergency this Mayday. A political emergency, that's for sure. An economic emergency coming fast down the pipe. And if we're not very lucky, our idiot leaders will lead us over the cliff into a military emergency, the mother of all emergencies, which could mean that we'll not be talking to each other for very much longer. But while we can, we'll be broadcasting this Open University of the Airwaves. For the next 3 hours, we'll be looking at the war in the foreground and the background. We'll be looking at the political contests coming up this week in local government, particularly in Ireland, but actually increasingly about whether or not Boris Johnson will survive here on the main island of the British Isles. We'll be talking to America. We'll be talking to Americans abroad. And I'll probably be keeping Britain's end up in the discussion. So fasten your seatbelts, because this is rock and roll television with an audience in the past 7 days of 1.7 million people. That beats into a cocked hat the audience for any other show in the English language on politics or news or current affairs. It knocks Piers Morgan into a cocked hat, and he's backed by Rupert Murdoch. We're backed only by you, and I'll tell you more about how we need your backing and how you can give it more easily than ever. So maybe this is your first time here. If it is, a very happy May Day holiday to you. If you're a regular, you know that I'm sounding the emergency button, because we as a society are in very, very big trouble, even when it comes to eating, never mind heating. So, over the next 3 hours, I hope you'll enjoy a high octane. Well, you can't afford high octane fuel for very much longer. Get your high octane here on the mother of all talk shows.
Curious about our curriculum? Have something to say? Then call us now to join the debate on the mother of all talk shows. The only education you can get for free. George Galloway, the mother of all talk shows. With George Galloway, the world is our classroom, and you're welcome to sit in and join the seminar.
You may be one of those joining us for the first time, because we have had phenomenal growth on new platforms over the last 7 days, particularly TikTok, a particularly strong showing on TikTok, more than 500,000 views. But for the rest of you who are used to this, fasten your seatbelts, because I'm going to have to talk tough, not to you, but about our leaders, because we are headed firmly for disaster. The proximate reason for choosing this subject to lead off my monologue this evening was that in the early hours of this morning, I paid £1.97 for 1 litre of diesel. It's a Volvo car. It's got good mileage, thank God. If it didn't, then even I would have been in serious trouble. £1.97 for a litre approximates to £8.94 per gallon. It will be within days, I suspect, at least in the filling station I attended last evening, £9 per gallon. £9 per gallon is a kick in the backside of an almost literally unbelievable £10 a gallon. This is not a cri de coeur for my petrol bills, I can afford to pay them, though there are many people who cannot afford to buy fuel for their vehicle at that price. And those people would tend to be the very same people that require their vehicle in order to get to work, in order to carry out their working duties, or who live, as I do, in places where public transport is a phantasm. Public transport round here, you'll wait a day for a bus to come by. There is no alternative to driving for millions of people in Britain, and in the United States for scores, maybe hundreds of millions of Americans. And yet the price of fuel is rising inexorably. It's going to, of course, feed into the price of everything else, because thanks to the destruction of much of our railway network, almost everything that you consume in a shop, in a restaurant, anywhere else is brought ultimately by road. If the price of travelling by road goes up, so do the prices of the goods that are travelling by road. If you add to that the shortage of essential foodstuffs that is now feeding fast through the pipeline, like wheat for one thing. Wheat is in everything. It's even in your burger. McDonald's burger, other brands are available, but they all contain wheat. Russia's the #1 supplier of wheat in the world. Ukraine is the #2 supplier of wheat in the world. For reasons which will be obvious, will not be eating much, if anything, of either of those two wheat fields. The price of other foodstuffs is also beginning to rocket, where those foodstuffs are not themselves becoming unavailable. If you eat fish and chips out of a British fish and chip shop, and who doesn't in my country, then eat this. 1 in 3 of our fish and chip shops is set to close in the next 12 months because it will not be able to get the sunflower, which they require for their cooking oil. Where does the sunflower come from? It comes from Russia, silly. It comes from Ukraine, silly. And the price of fertilizer has rocketed. And so the shortage in the fields come next harvest is not rocket science to estimate. The price of fertilizer has rocketed because the geniuses that run the British and American governments have sanctioned Russian fertilizer. Russia is one of the biggest suppliers of fertilizer in the entire world. You see where I'm going here? We've got leaders that have struggled mightily to lift a huge stone, only to drop it on our feet, not their own. They're well heeled. Their feet are not in the way. The ministers, the plutocrats, the oligarchs that run Britain and America will not run short of any of the things that I have just described. But you will either not be able to get essential products, or you will only be able to get it at a price that you cannot afford. You'll notice that I didn't mention Russian gas. I didn't mention it perhaps because it's the most serious of all. It's not just that you need Russian gas in Europe to stay warm, or at the height of the summer to stay cool. It's that every factory, workshop, mine and mill is turning on power, electric power, gas power. And the Russians are on the verge of telling us they no longer wish us to be their customers. That's because of the absurd hullabaloo about Russia's demand to be paid in its own currency for its own exports. I need to spell this out because so many people are so silly about this. If I told my gas supplier I wasn't going to pay him in pounds, I would prefer to pay him in rubles, he would laugh in my face and cut my gas off. Yet so many idiots can't grasp that if Russia wants paid for its gas in its currency, it is perfectly entitled to do so. And if you refuse, it will cut off your gas. Now, 9 countries have already. Some of them have done it secretly. Others have publicly conceded that they have, like Italy, like Greece, have opened ruble accounts at the Gazprom Bank and are now paying right now for their gas in rubles. One imagines that their supply will now be secure. But what about countries like Poland or, heaven forfend, Bulgaria? Poland has announced it will not pay Russia in rubles. So Russia immediately stopped its gas supply last Friday. But what does Poland intend to do? It intends to buy Russian gas from Germany. But the Russians are quite good at chess. So they've said that whatever Poland buys from Germany will be deducted from Germany's allocation of gas, because it will not allow its ruble requirement to be circumvented in such a comic opera way. So if the Germans decide to sell the gas to Poland that Poland is no longer prepared to buy in rubles from Russia, then the consumers in Germany will go short. The price will rocket and the factories will stop operating. I'm going to concentrate on Germany for a minute because it's the most powerful economy in Europe, and because if it heads south, then every other economy in the European Union, including our own in Great Britain, will head south with it. I'm going to give you some facts. Imported electricity costs in Germany over the last 12 months, never mind over the last 4, has risen by 440.8%. The price of imported coal rose by 307.5% in Germany. Gas by 304.3% in Germany. And petroleum products by 110.3% in Germany. And oil by 81.3% in Germany. The German employers have said this weekend that the only way that the German consumer can have enough gas next autumn and winter is if the factories begin to close. And those factories, in Germany they still have factories. They still employ thousands of people in those factories. If they start to close, will cascade millions onto the unemployment queues. Just at a time when Germany is filling up with even more refugees. What could possibly go wrong? The German economy crashing and burning, whilst millions of new potential scapegoats for a rising tide of German ultra-nationalism, I'll go no further than that, begins to rise. And don't tell me it's not happening. Look at the German media. Look at the vandalism and Russophobic hatred on display in Germany. Look how easily little soldier Schultz has reverted to type, a peacenik, with his Green Party peacenik partners, are now rabid for war against Russia. 77 years exactly since the Soviet flag was hoisted over the Reichstag and Berlin lay in ruins, its fascist dictator dead like a rat in a basement in the Reich Chancellery bunker. 77 years, that's all. There's people watching this that are more than 77 years old. My mother, for one of them. There are many people like me that grew up in the shadow of the cataclysmic events of the Second World War, who know that fascism didn't arise in Germany out of thin air. It arose out of a set of material conditions which Western idiot governments had themselves helped to pave the way to the rise of fascism, the Holocaust, and the Second World War. You see where I'm going with this. When you're led by idiots, as we then were and are again now, it's perfectly possible, even for the well-intentioned, to end up objectively, whether willingly or unwillingly, providing support, material support, for the rise of fascism, or as in the case of the right sector and the Azov regiments and Svoboda and all the other far-right factions in the Ukraine, literally filling their pockets with money, stuffing their mouths with gold, on the principle that my enemy's enemy is my friend. I watched a stunning Netflix series in the week. It's called Turning Point, 9/11 and its aftermath. A lot of it was flim-flam, a lot of tearful Americans talking about the death of their much cherished constitution and what a law-abiding country they used to be. Tell that to the Marines. Tell that to the Vietnamese and 100 other people. Like the genre of Vietnam films, there's a lot of they made us do it, look what they made us do. But nonetheless, Turning Point is devastating because from their own mouths they describe not only the crimes that they committed, but the blood and treasure which these crimes cost. $2.3 trillion were spent by the United States in Afghanistan alone in developing a kleptocracy. You see, Joe, I can say it. A kleptocracy that humanity has possibly never seen before. A kleptocracy that made the political puppet leaders of Afghanistan the richest men on the earth, richer than the oligarchs in the countries that were providing the money. And then 20 years later, they were gone. And the people who'd been there 20 years before are back in power. It scarcely touches, only on the surface, of the situation in Iraq. But an equal catastrophe, perhaps of even greater global significance, occurred there. Why am I laboring that point? For this reason. We keep doing these things over and over and over again. We learn nothing. In fact, the same correspondents that talked us into the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, talked us into the catastrophe in Libya, the near-death experience in Syria, the same correspondents are talking us in deeper and deeper into a war with Russia. I saw coming, snaking up the road in Camden Town, Just the other day, Andrew Marr, not half the man he used to be, not half the platform he used to have, but still on a local radio station here in London every week, expounding the same myths and the same foolishness. One more push. Ukraine just needs one more push. Just needs another billion, another 100 billion. Some more tanks, some more rockets, some more men and material. And the Russian bear can be vanquished. It is fantasy politics, fantasy military politics, but they're all still at it. Andrew Marr was the man who stood in front of 10 Downing Street and told the worldwide audience then of the BBC that Mr. Tony Blair stood even taller tonight, and his critics have been humbled by the fall of Baghdad. But Mr. Marr, the fall of Baghdad was not the beginning of the end, merely the end of the beginning. And the war that you supported and trumpeted for with every breath in your body is still going on multiple fronts all over the world. And the whole generation of fanatics radicalized by it have begotten a new generation of their own children who I'll warrant will grow up just as fanatical. Tony Blair never did face that war crimes tribunal, but he is being memorialized on the West End stage. A rock opera called Tony Blair is already in rehearsal. This is not a rehearsal. This is the mother of all talk shows. I'll be talking to great guests, but I also want to hear from you. So hit the phone lines, Joe and Josephine.
Hi, George. The deep state, we mentioned it before. So rather than fear-mongering that everything that's going on at the moment with the COVID, the wars, blah, 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 why aren't we all addressing the deep state rather than this fear-mongering that's going over and over again?
How do you address it?
What I'm trying to get across, and hopefully your listeners will understand this, there is a deep state at work, and you know that.
Everybody knows that. That's a statement of the bleeding obvious.
So let's do something about that. Rather than rattling and rolling about the...
Give us a lead. Be our leader. Be our leader, Del.
Who are the deep states?
Yeah.
Oh, what a brilliant question. Those that are all over us. And what should we do about them? We should make them accountable.
I'm just trying to work out whether you're in the territory of shape-shifting lizards or you're talking about MI5 and MI6.
Please don't turn it into a circus, George. You know full well what's going on, and please don't.
I do. I'm just struggling to get from you what it is we should be doing about them. What should I do about MI5 and MI6? And how should I do it?
Just stand up and go, there's something inherently wrong here. And
there's something really wrong here. There you are. I've sorted it, Del. Thanks for the call.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I still love that one. There's something really wrong here. Well, of course there is, but that's only maybe 1/10 of the battle to realize there's something really wrong here. The question is, what are we going to do about it? Meanwhile, you can vote on the first poll of the evening. Should the EU buy gas from Russia in rubles? A, yes. B, no. You can vote on my Twitter account, Blue Tick, and you can vote on my YouTube account, Blue Tick, and on my Telegram channel. I don't know if they have blue ticks or not, but get voting. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we are not backed by Rupert Murdoch or yet by any sponsor. Alas, alas, because I'm looking for one every day. And I am in discussion with at least one, maybe two potential serious contenders. And if they come on board as the sponsor of the mother of all talk shows, not only will we be able to continue without asking for your support, we might even be able to bring back the midweek MOATS. Meanwhile, I'm still doing my Galloway show. No budget television on a Wednesday night. None of all of this. No studio. Just me and my missus in the front room, literally on last week's occasion. Just the two of us. And more than 50,000 people watched it and have been watching it, between 50 and 75,000 people. So I'm thinking that's a core audience that wants a midweek show. If you didn't know about it, well, now you know. It's only on my YouTube channel. And it starts at 10 p.m. In London, so it gives the Americans time to get home from work and join the audience. But until I get those sponsors, then I have to tell you that if we're going to keep this Open University open, you'll have to fill the gap. It's not a lot that we're asking for. I'm literally asking you for $1. I'm asking you for £1. I think I'm worth it. I think this show is worth it. I think you'd be more than £1 or $1 less well off if this show had to go out of business. Now, if you are among the very many people who have given already and given handsomely well more than $1 or £1, please take a holiday. I'm not seeking to squeeze you out of more money. But I'm really asking the people who are watching this and who will watch it in the course of the week, are you comfortable with the fact that it might go out of business because you didn't send £1 or $1? It's really easy. Just go to moats.tv/donate and perhaps most importantly, press a recurrent donation. So if you're giving £1, press a button, that's all, that will make sure that automatically £1 or $1 every week goes from your account to the mother of all talk shows. Let's hit the switchboard and talk with Hugo in London. Hugo, welcome.
Hello, George. I hope you're well, and I would like to thank you and your team for the show, first of all. George, but so my question, let me rant for a bit first, I suppose. I have to be honest, I never thought in my life that we would be living in a time where we, the human species as a collective, will be selecting these sore excuses for human beings as our leaders, truly. We particularly in the West have clowns leading us, playing around with nuclear demise. I mean, at this point in time, I'm wondering what will exterminate our species first, nuclear war or climate change. I mean, the metaphor for me is we've handed control to the inmates and they're running the asylum. So my question for you is, what can we, the people, do to make things right, or better at least? Because if we keep allowing these people to be in control, then I don't think we have a future, any of us, really.
Well, Hugo, I couldn't put it more succinctly than you have, so let me just accentuate one or two of the points that you made. that we are led by clowns is daily more evident. If you are watching the videos of President Joe Biden, your first thought will be, this must be a spoof. This man cannot possibly be running the most powerful country on earth, with the most powerful military, spending 7 times as much on weapons of war as the next 10 countries put together. This idea that Joe Biden, who doesn't know when he's finished, who doesn't know whether to go left or go right, this man who's shaking imaginary hands in non-existing audiences around him, this man who cannot pronounce the most basic words that are written on a screen in big writing in front of him, this man that you wouldn't send out for a loaf, he cannot be running the show. But he is. Boris Johnson. Would you trust Boris Johnson to look after your pets? Certainly not your children. Certainly not your wife. Would you trust Boris Johnson to tell you the truth in your personal life? Of course, the answer to that is you wouldn't. Boris Johnson should have been horsewhipped out of political public life decades ago. But the Mountbank is still in control of the British government. And guess what? His potential rivals in his own cabinet are even worse than he is. And guess what? Even worse. The leader of the opposition and his hirelings are even worse than Boris Johnson. Now that's what I call a serious political problem. In France, they somehow arranged it that little Macron, the pint-sized Napoleon, got back. Not handsomely. They couldn't persuade anyone that that was going to be a handsome victory, but standing against the daughter of one of Pétain's collaborators in Vichy, France, he squeaked a narrow victory with a lower percentage turnout, I think for 50 or 60 years in the French presidential second round election. By a combination of good luck and perfidious idiots on the far left, Mélenchon wasn't in the final ballot. If he had been, he'd be in the Élysée right now with a landslide victory behind him. But put up a communist here, a couple of Trotskyists there, a Starmer Blairite there, and you take just enough of the percentage to make sure that Mélenchon, a socialist like me, can never make it onto the final ballot. Little soldier Schulz isn't tall enough or man enough to carry Angela Merkel's handbag. Merkel has forgotten more about war and about international politics than little Schulz, the grandson of an SS officer who was involved in the siege of Moscow. Not making that bit up. Little Schulz and the toxic greens, poisonous, radioactive greens that he shares power within Berlin. These are the people in charge of our destiny, Hugo. What can we do? Well, the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we never vote for any of them again. There are elections in Britain coming up on Thursday. Whatever you do, don't vote for the Conservatives, for the Labour Party, or for the Liberal Democrats. Spoil your paper. Vote for anybody else A cat has just crawled into my studio. So if you see it jumping on my lap, it doesn't make me a James Bond baddie. I'm terrified that it does that now, and this is all a spoof. It's a black and white cat. It's called Chess. It's very pretty, actually. Shugo, thanks for the call. On line 2 in Colorado is Jim. Go ahead, Jim.
Hi, George. This morning I listened to an interview with Michael Hudson. He's an economist here in the U.S. I don't know if you know him or who he is.
I do. I've interviewed him, yes.
Oh, good. I must have missed that. Okay, he was being interviewed by Katie Halper and Aaron Mate, and he talked about Janet Yellen, who gave a speech saying that we're going to use this war to solidify the American unipolarity that we now run the globe, or we think we do, and we want to run it even better. And that is really scary. It's Klaus Schwab, who was at a conference. They were both at Davos. He mentioned that there was like 200 million people extra on the planet. That we're overpopulated, and we have to get rid of.
They're Malthusian fanatics. All these oligarchs.
I can't believe this. He was talking about I think you mentioned the IMF, that they're still going to, they're just giving loans to the Ukrainians, okay, instead of giving them aid. It's all a loan, and they're going to pay interest on it. And the IMF is going to be one of the tools that they make we're going to make the rest of the world poor. And it's just blowing my mind that
but we'll be happy, apparently, Jim. We'll own nothing, but we'll be happy. That's the tune sung by these Looney Tunes at the World Economic Forum. Michael Hudson's godfather, by the way, literally, not metaphorically, was Leon Trotsky, which is one of the least interesting things about him. He is a wonderful economist and a wonderful guest and a wonderful writer. No, you're right, Jim. And let me tell you something that maybe you didn't know, maybe you did. We only finished paying the United States for the lend that they gave us during the Second World War in 2007. I was actually on air on a local radio station on a Friday night on the day that we finally paid off the United States bill. Thank you, Mr. Roosevelt, sang George Formby, for that aid that you gave us in the Second World War, except it wasn't aid. It was a loan, and we didn't finish paying it because of the interest on it until 2007. At this rate, the Ukraine will be paying the United States back for the munitions and materiel that they are currently receiving well into this century, perhaps nearing the end of this century. Jim in Colorado, thanks very much indeed. How's the poll going? Should the EU buy gas from Russia in rubles? Yes, 73, no, 27 on Twitter. Yes, 93, no, 7 on YouTube, and yes, 97, no, 3% on my Telegram channel. Get voting over the next period while I try and get rid of this cat, because if this cat were to jump up on this table now, it would be the video clip of them all. I'll be right back.
And it's a very, thank you for, I'm a big fan of your show, Gigi. Great debate, great. And I'm Scottish. I'm very passionate about what's happening there, I had a great mom. She was Scottish, Mary MacLeod. She taught me well. She taught me well at everything, including golf. I love Scotland, and I love the Scottish food. It's great food. I said to Melania, you know, haggis. Look at that. What's more Scottish than that? Me. I am that haggis. She said, what, thin-skinned and full of crap?
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I totally love that Donald Trump voice. Zeitgeist says, it's their stuff, the Russian gas. If you want it, then pay for it in the currency requested or look elsewhere. Rasputin Robson says, if I sell something and someone wants to buy it, they pay in the way I'd want them to, or I sell it elsewhere. It's not hard, it's not blackmail. It's simply common sense. And Alvin says, Western Europe is in for a brutal winter. Inflation will be higher than in living memory, and there will be major power outages. The EU is about to implode. And Peter Weatherly says the fall of the petrodollar would be economically disastrous for the United States. Isn't that just one of the reasons the US is pouring billions of dollars into the Ukraine war? Well, I know a man that knows the answer to that and most questions. He's Donald Courter. He's an American in Moscow. He's an RT correspondent and a political analyst of the highest rank. Donald, welcome back to the show. Things are much different from when I last spoke with you. Let's deal with this economic situation first. I adumbrated at the beginning of the show in my monologue the many vast price increases in the pipeline or already on the table, on the shelves, and the shortages coming fast down the pipeline and the economic implications of those. All of this was done to punish Russia. How's that going?
Well, it seems to be completely backfiring on the Western powers because, I mean, I think the greatest indicator is how the ruble's doing in relation to the euro and the pound and the dollar right now. It's actually stronger than it was even before Russia began its military operation in Ukraine and the West put these unprecedented sanctions on the country. And now, as you were talking about before, these European countries that have been buying Russian gas for so many years, they have to pay in rubles. This has had a significant strengthening effect on Russia's currency. And the countries that have not actually agreed to do this is the interesting part. They're buying gas from other European countries that are also buying gas from Russia. So it really is not even hurting Russia at all there.
No, but it will hurt Germany if Russia deducts that which it's selling on to other countries from its allocation, which, as I understand, is a decision that is imminent. Do the Russian people feel any pain from these sanctions that are crippling our own economy?
Well, I mean, I have to say here, to be fair, in Russia, there is a high inflation rate, I mean, as in the rest of the world. But I would say that the kind of, what the Western powers expected to happen in Russia just did not pan out. I mean, there are not lines of people waiting for food that's in shortage or deficit in supermarkets. There's no massive economic destruction here. Actually, because of the kind of sanctions that have been leveled by the West against Russia and the kind of overwhelming support that the West has given to Ukraine in terms of weapons and basically doing anything they can to support the Ukrainian effort against Russia's military operation, Russia's rallied around its government. I mean, Putin's administration is very popular right now, and life has not gotten much harder because as a result of these sanctions, no. So that's basically what the outcome has been. I mean,
well, go on.
Well, I was going to say, I've seen a lot of Western media reports. I've been watching it as well to see what the Western media is talking about the situation here. I remember a couple weeks back seeing a report about talking about how people are fighting in supermarkets and hoarding food and everything in some crazy anticipation of an economic disaster. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. That's complete fake news.
Now, let me put your American hat on for a minute. Putin's popularity is at an all-time high. He's getting a war bounce. But your president, as an American citizen, is experiencing the reverse. Despite the full mobilization, in an almost military sense, of virtually all of the US media. How do you account for that?
Well, I think that has to do with the fact that basically most Americans can see through what the Biden administration is trying to do here. I mean, they're trying to get this war bounce as well, that especially at a time where the United States is seeing record inflation, at a time where, you know, we're seeing homelessness and unemployment and all these terrible social ills just completely exacerbated in the United States as a result of you know, Biden's choice to give so much money and weapons to Ukraine, Biden's economic choices throughout the pandemic and this whole situation. And then we heard President Biden also say that accuse Russia and the pandemic of the prime reasons for why people should be, you know, the prime people to blame, the prime factors to blame for the rising prices in the United States. But I mean, this has been happening even before the Russia's military operation began, and the pandemic really exacerbated something that was already happening as well. I mean, American economics has been seeing long stagnation for a long time, and people kind of see what Biden's saying as sort of an excuse, sort of diversion of blame that can only be put on the American government itself. I mean, in the United States, people don't have free health care, people don't have free education, there's tons of debt, and people are just dealing with that alongside rising prices. They don't want to hear excuses that, that you know, it has something to do with Putin or Ukraine, you know?
Well, even if the people were persuaded that it was Putin's fault, there's nothing they can do about Putin. They can't vote Putin out in Peoria, but they can vote the Democratic Party out in the midterms in November. How do you think all this is feeding through in that regard?
Well, I think in terms of the two-party political system in the United States, a lot of people who, I guess, were unhappy with Trump voted for Biden, expecting something to be different. And now Biden's approval ratings are even lower than Trump's ever fell to. So I really think Trump's going to run again and perhaps, you know, end up winning, end up being the second president in American history that was president for 2 terms that were not consecutive. I mean, I personally don't support Trump necessarily. I'm against both parties, but that's the way I see it. I mean, people are even more fed up with Biden than they were with the Trump administration.
Now, the eye-watering amount, I mean, I've lost count of the amount of military aid that Biden has announced, at least. Announcements and delivery are, of course, not always the same thing. And I'm sure that Joe Biden's lost count of it once he got past his 2 hands. But the amount of hardware is actually now leaving the American military inventory empty. For example, 40% of the anti-tank munitions in the Pentagon's stores has actually not just been given to Ukraine, but already used by Ukraine to precious little effect, at least no effect that they've been able to film and photograph and credibly put on the news. So where is all this material that the US is pouring in? Where is it going to, and where will it end up?
Well, I have to say first that I think, as you said, I mean, the Javelin stockpiles of the United States military are being significantly depleted. And who's that profitable for? The corporations that produce the weapons and ammunitions of the United States military. It's completely profitable for the war industry. And that's a good question you bring up. Where is all this stuff going to end up? Well, first, I can tell you that the huge amounts of these munitions are going to the Ukrainian military, and they're using it not to, just fight in this war, but also they've actually ramped up the attacks they've been making on Russian territory. We've seen a lot more missile attacks from the Ukrainian side on Russian territory itself since the US and the UK have been actually increasing the amount of weapons that they're feeding the Ukrainian military. And we even heard from several British officials last week that they were actually egging the Ukrainian military on to use them to attack Russian soil. Now, this to me is a huge provocation. This is really like a clear example of the Western powers potentially bringing the world closer to World War III. You know, it's like it really blurs the lines when British officials are calling for their weapons to be used to attack Russian territory, really blurs the lines between proxy war and full-out confrontation. And this is something that the Russian government responded to as well. They said that if the Ukrainian military uses British weapons to attack Russian soil, and Russian forces become acutely aware of that, then they're going to have to respond with their own measures. They're going to have to carry out strategic attacks on decision-making centers in Kiev, which was previously not on their agenda. So this kind of aimless throwing of weapons, state-of-the-art weaponry into Ukraine, it's really dangerous, not only for the potential escalation of the conflict into something bigger than it is, but also the fact that, there's no way to track these weapons once the war is over. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know where it's going to go. And Ukraine is actually one of the countries in Europe with the largest black market for trafficked weapons. So that's definitely something concerning.
Yeah, the dark web is already selling some of the things that your government and mine have already shipped to Ukraine. Let's switch gear if we can. You are an RT correspondent. That makes you Russian state-affiliated media. I'm not, but I'm also, at least so far as Twitter is concerned, labeled in the same way. But the truth is, neither of us speak for Russia, and neither of us knows what Russia's end game is going to be. But let's speculate for a minute, Donald. We're both intelligent people, and so are the graduates that are listening and watching this show. What does the end of the war look like to you?
Well, to me, I think it's, Russia's intent in this war, I personally think, has been pretty clear throughout the whole time. I think the Western media has tried to distort it. It's tried to make it look like Russia's been is interested in annexing Ukraine or just destroying the Ukrainian nation. That's why we've heard President Biden use the term genocide, which I think is completely out of place and doesn't have anything to do with the situation there. But the way I think we could, the outcome I think we could see from this war that's going on here is a potential for Ukraine, the Ukraine that we knew from before the war, to be split into three possible different places. The first is the People's Republics of Donbass, Donetsk, and Lugansk that Russia recognized the independence of. They are, with the support of the Russian military, they've successfully defended themselves at this point. I think it's pretty clear they're not going to be part of Ukraine after all this is over. Then we're going to have part of the country under the control of of Zelensky's administration. But there's also the possibility of another thing happening that I just want to mention, because last week, Russian foreign intelligence released a report that said that the Polish government, now we don't have concrete evidence that this is going to happen yet, but there are some suspicious circumstances around this. Russian foreign intelligence said that Warsaw, the capital of Poland, the government there is potentially planning to take over some of its territorial claims that it had back in World War I that are currently on Ukrainian territory. Russian intelligence says that Poland is going to potentially send what it calls peacekeepers to western regions of the country under the auspices of defending it from so-called Russian aggression, even though the westernmost regions of the country are the least likely to see any confrontations with Russian troops. And the plan, allegedly, according to this Russian report, is that the peacekeepers that are going to be there are going to try to establish a pro-Warsaw counterbalance government to the Ukrainian nationalists there that are going to have the support of friendly Ukrainian elites there. And apparently the Polish government is going to understand that the country's going to split apart after that, and it's going to take advantage of the chaos to basically reclaim, again, like I said before, the territorial claims that it had all the way back in World War I. So that's according to this Russian intelligence report. And I mean, there is a very suspicious circumstance connected to this. Poland is now conducting these military exercises near the area that people didn't have any idea about just 2 weeks ago. And there were also reports that the government was telling people not to take pictures or videos of Polish troop movements during these quote-unquote exercises. So that to me is super suspicious and a possibility for part of the outcome after this war.
And Transnistria, a couple of days ago, it looked like the balloon was about to go up there with Romania potentially invading Moldova, with or without Moldova's collusion, and both of them invading Transnistria. Tell us briefly a couple of things about that.
Yeah, well, unfortunately, I don't know that much about that. I would like to be more in the loop with what's been going on over there, but I mainly know more about what's been going on with Ukraine and Poland. But I did hear about the attack on Transnistria that has some, nobody really knows who actually was behind it. It just seems like some factions in that region are probably taking advantage of the fact that there's regional instability right next door, so.
Do you think, Donald, that this war will still be going on next May Day?
No. By next May Day, I don't think so. I think the Russian government would probably like to have it done by May 9th. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, it looks like the war is pretty much going to stay the way it is, I think, because Mariupol has been liberated by Russian forces. There's, of course, still the Azovstal plant that has the last remnants of these neo-Nazi battalions that have refused to leave. But after that, basically all of Donbass would have been already liberated, which was the goal of the operation, as Vladimir Putin said at the beginning, to defend the people of Donbass that have been terrorized by the Ukrainian government for the past 8 years, and to liquidate these neo-Nazi battalions that have become part of the regular military of Ukraine. And that's pretty much done as well at this point.
In 30 seconds, how are you received on the streets of Moscow as an American?
Completely normally. Nothing has changed for me. A lot of my friends have asked me that question as well in the West, because they've noticed how Russophobia has just exploded over there. But I have to say, it's not the same over here. People still, respect everyone, regardless of nation, the way they did before the war. And there's no sort of anti-Western sentiment just against the people who are from those countries. Of course, people aren't happy with the governments there, that's for sure.
Well, neither are we, and we live here. Donald Courter, thank you very much for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Coming up in the next hour, it is Richard Medhurst, internet sensation and truth teller, respected journalist from Al Mayadeen Television, for whom I also myself present a show called Kali Mahora. You can find it on YouTube. A large number of people are nowadays. Richard Medhurst, one of my favorite correspondents. Well, I'm going to take a break for the news, get rid of this cat. I'm leaving you in the hands of Elliot King.
The United Nations is conducting a safe passage operation for civilians from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. The evacuation began on Friday and is being conducted with the International Committee of the Red Cross, Russia and Ukraine. Abreu said the convoy arrived at the steelworks on Saturday morning. He described the situation regarding the evacuations as very complex. He added that no further details could be released so as to not yet jeopardise the safety of evacuees still making the journey. The move was also confirmed by the International Committee of the Red Cross on Sunday afternoon. Food prices will keep rising and stay higher for quite some time due to the high cost of raw materials, according to Asda's chairman. Lord Rose, who sits on the supermarket chain's board, said many families struggling with the costs of living crisis are going to suffer, although retailers will try to keep the costs down. Pressures on prices include the war in Ukraine and a resurgence of COVID in China, the Conservative peer said. Oil and gas prices were already rising rapidly before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the war has pushed prices up further. In turn, this ramping up raw material costs for manufacturers and retailers, including for meats like chicken and staples such as pasta, with the price hikes being passed on to consumers. Co-op Chief Executive Steve Morrells agreed, saying that chicken could become as expensive as beef due to the war in Ukraine. The Bank of England expects price inflation to hit 8% this spring. However, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said inflation would not necessarily be long-term. Closing the UK's Parliament bars in a bid to tackle a culture of sexual misconduct on the estate would be excessively puritanical, Kwasi Kwarteng has said. The Business Secretary said that despite concerns regarding excessive drinking taking place on the Parliament estate, the bars should not be closed. He also admitted that the scheme to deal with sexual misconduct allegations in Parliament, which was set up in 2018, isn't working sufficiently well. It comes after Conservative MP Neil Parish said he will resign after admitting to watching pornographic film in the House of Commons twice. He claimed that the first time was accidental after looking at tractors online, but that the second was a moment of madness. Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates has warned there is a way above 5% risk that the world has not seen the worst of the COVID pandemic. The tech mogul and philanthropist said he did not want to sound doom and gloom, but warned there was a risk even more transmissive and even more fatal variants could emerge. He said that the risk of this happening is way above 5%. It is not the first time he has made such a prediction. In December 2021, he warned his millions of Twitter followers to brace themselves for the worst part of the pandemic, having previously cautioned in 2015 that the world was not ready for the next pandemic. US President Joe Biden has resumed the tradition of speaking at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner after a 6-year presidential hiatus. He is the first leader to speak at the event, where the president faces friendly mocking in front of an audience of journalists since 2016. It was cancelled for 2 years due to the pandemic and was boycotted by Donald Trump when he was in office. Comedian and The Daily Show host Trevor Noah headlined the event. Biden addressed the fact that he's the first president to attend the event since President Trump. "This is the first time a president has attended the dinner in 6 years," he said. "It's understandable. We had a horrible plague followed by 2 years of COVID." The president also faced his share of roasts. Noah told Biden, "Ever since you've come into office, things are really looking up. Gas is up, rent is up, food is up, everything." The family of Paul Rusesabagina, the subject of Oscar-nominated film Hotel Rwanda, have filed a $400 million lawsuit in the United States over his alleged abduction and torture. He was sentenced to 25 years for terrorism by a Rwanda court last year in what supporters called a sham trial. His family say the Rwanda government lured him from the state of Texas, where he was living in Al-Aqsa exile, back to Rwanda. He is credited with saving some 1,200 people during the 1994 genocide. In a statement, Rusesabagini's family said that the $400 million sought in compensation will grow every day that Paul is held in captivity. The head of Guinea's military government has announced the country will return to civilian rule after a 39-month transition period. Speaking on television, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya said the proposal would now be put to Guinea's parliament. His army ousted the elected president in a coup last year, a move many Guineans initially welcomed. But there has been growing discontent as the military junta failed to hand over power to civilian rule. The announcement came after the regional bloc of West African nations, ECOWAS, said last Monday as the deadline for the army to give its timeline or face immediate sanctions. A guide listing 37 different gender terms and sexual identities has been issued to police officers and staff in a British force to help them when dealing with members of the public. Norfolk Constabulary documents named the Plus in LGBT explains current terminology alongside a picture of a gender-bread person, a play on gingerbread man. Critics called it a complete waste of taxpayers' money. Some of the terms relating to sexuality, such as questioning or asexual, are self-evident, but others will be new to most, such as gynosexual, someone who is attracted to the feminine gender presentation, and grey asexual, a person who experiences attraction rarely. Norfolk Police declined to say whether it had produced the guide itself or had obtained it from another organisation. And finally, Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan are returning to the long-awaited Australian TV soap opera Neighbours for its finale after more than 30 years away. They will resume their roles as characters Scott Robinson and Charlene Mitchell in the fictional Melbourne suburb of Erinsborough. Their return to Ramsay Street comes after it was announced that the show will end this summer after 37 years. The pair were a favourite with viewers before their departure in the 1980s. Sharing a message on the show's official Twitter account, executive producer Jason Herbison said, "Scott and Charlene are the ultimate neighbours couple, and it would not feel right to end the show without them." That's all your news for now. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
Thank you, Elliot King, for that piece of news, which I might otherwise have missed. That Jason and what's her name again? Charlene? Mylene? I don't know. They're back on Neighbours. I've got an idea. Why don't the Russians buy Neighbours? They could provide an overcast sky and a papier-mâché set and wooden actors. They may have to work hard to beat the Australian version, but wouldn't that be something? Neighbours in Russia? I mean, I think Minogue has had a decent enough career, but Jason has been treading the boards in some rum places. I reckon you could get him to Moscow quite cheaply for a remake of Neighbours. Enough. Should the EU buy gas from Russia in rubles? A, yes, B, no. You can vote on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel. Please do subscribe. I'm closing in on 200,000 subscribers there now. I'd like to get to 200,000. I didn't get my plaque for getting to 100,000. They obviously didn't fancy a picture of them handing a plaque to me. But I reckon if I get to 200,000 and they owe me 2 plaques, they won't be able to chicken out any longer. But you can also vote on my Telegram channel. Please follow me on Telegram, t.me/George Galloway. Ditto, follow me on patreon.com/George Galloway, because, well, if the balloon goes up, that might be the only place you'll be able to hear me and see me. Now, amazingly, I told you earlier about TikTok. I didn't even know we were on TikTok. But last week, more than 500,000 people watched the show on TikTok. And now I understand we're on Getter. That's Gettr. Now, you can follow me there at George Galloway. We're live on there now. And the audience is currently small, but it's double what it was 2 minutes ago. And I reckon I've just doubled it again. I also need you to donate. Otherwise, you'll tune in one Sunday and I simply won't be here because it's not been possible to pay the bills. So go to moats.tv/donate. And a recurrent donation, please. Just £1, $1 recurrent, will see us through until we get a sponsor. But you can also apparently donate by Super Chat on YouTube. Don't ask me what that is, but the younger people tell me it's all the rage. Super Chat on YouTube. Now, Richard Medhurst. I thought I'd discovered Richard as a very young man of fantastic promise, but he's already a superstar. He's got a blue tick on Twitter. He's reached 100,000 subscribers on YouTube. He's my colleague at Al Mayadeen Television, and he now is at a television station I used to work for a decade or so ago, namely Press TV. And the reason that he has reached these dizzy heights is that he is both brilliant and absolutely fearless. He's Richard Medhurst, and he joins us now. Richard, congratulations on all of these achievements in such a short space of time, at such a young age. I predict a great future for you over the next decades. You are one of the leaders to come. Credit to your mother and father and to all who've made you what you are. I want to ask you a difficult question. It is almost Eid, the end of the Muslim month of fasting in Ramadan. It's been a particularly difficult Ramadan for the Palestinians, and in particular in Jerusalem. Now that Ramadan has passed, will Israel begin to ease up, or have we moved up incrementally into a period of really intense confrontations, which could spiral out of control?
Well, first of all, thank you, George, for having me on and for your very kind comments. I'm humbled, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Honestly, I'm really revolted by what's happening in Palestine. I was putting together some pictures and videos of the attack on Al-Aqsa Mosque, and believe it or not, I actually got the wrong pictures because the ones I had found were from 2021, and then I found pictures from 2017, and it seems that every single year, particularly during Ramadan, they go and they attack, or I should say they storm the halls of the Aqsa Mosque, which for Muslims is the third holiest site. And I mean, for me as a Syrian Christian, I'm absolutely appalled. I'm really disgusted by this. So I cannot even imagine what it's like for Palestinians who are in there praying during Ramadan. And I really do think there's a danger that it spirals into a bigger thing, because last year in May 2021, we saw how these evictions, the Israelis trying to kick out Palestinians that were already displaced once by the Israelis, a second time from their homes in Sheikh Jarrah, and then trying to prevent people from gathering at Damascus Gate, and then storming once again the halls of the Aqsa Mosque. This spiraled into a war, and who pays the cost for that? Of course, it's the Palestinians. The ratio is not even comparable. We have 2,000 dead Palestinians, 240 dead Palestinians, 2,000 wounded, and if you look at the other conflicts in Gaza, you will definitely find similar ratios where it's Palestinians who are really feeling the brunt of these attacks. And for what? For gathering? I mean, just imagine for 1 second if Palestinians were doing this going into a synagogue and firing tear gas. This is unheard of. The whole world would erupt. And if these were videos of Russians doing this to Ukrainians, the world would erupt. People would go nuclear. They would condemn it 24/7. It'd be front page news. But this is normalized now. Apparently, it's okay to see this. It doesn't register anymore as front page news even. And I think we are really at a dangerous impasse because it's not just about a few raids in a mosque during Ramadan. This is 70+ years of colonialism, 70+ years of the West bankrolling Israel's brutality and giving it a political pass for everything that it does. And it's outrageous because, if Russians were doing this, we would have no problem condemning this in the West. But because it's Israel, they get a pass. And if it spirals into a bigger situation and it's Palestinians who, again, are getting massacred, no one will care. No one will care.
Now, a prominent Israeli over the last hours has raised the possibility that the brutal incursions into such a holy place as the Al-Aqsa Mosque, and at such a sensitive time, at dawn in Ramadan, breaking the ancient stained glass windows, firing gas into not just any mosque, that would be bad enough, but a mosque of that venerable importance and so on, that this might begin to imperil the normalization relationships that have, under the last days of the Trump administration, gathered pace. So countries like the UAE, countries like Morocco, added to the countries that long ago normalized their relationship with Israel, namely Egypt and Jordan, Bahrain, of course, a new arrival at that staging post, that public pressure in those countries may begin to force their regimes to break relations with Israel, even though they only made them officially in the last 36 months.
Well, I think it is a travesty how they're damaging this building. You mentioned the stained glass, and I mean, we shouldn't forget the Aqsa Mosque has been there for well over 1,000 years. Even if you're not particularly religious or connected to Palestine in any way, we should be offended at these things. It's really an attack on human heritage, on our collective heritage. And they walk in there like it's a used car. They're just smashing windows and firing tear gas. There's zero respect whatsoever. And yesterday, the New York Times were talking about how the Russians are allegedly going into museums in Ukraine and taking their cultural heritage. I didn't see them complaining about what's happening in Palestine. And the countries that you mentioned, George, the ones that have normalized ties recently, and as you said, that's added to the list of Egypt and Jordan, I have my doubts that public pressure would change anything, because we have to understand something. In the Arab world, the overwhelming majority of people support the Palestinians. There is no question about that. And I think in every Arab country you will find that this is true. The overwhelming majority support the Palestinian plight and their fight for national liberation. Now, the thing is, their governments are on a completely different page. It's funny how we talk about, Iran and Syria and Russia, these are repressive autocracies, and they can't be reasoned with, and they don't care about democracy and Western values. I have never heard the West complain about Saudi Arabia and the UAE. They seem to be fine with them. They didn't have an Arab Spring, funnily enough. And so I think that, unfortunately, no matter how much public pressure there is, because we saw that in Bahrain when the Israeli foreign minister was visiting, people came out to protest, but it's not going to change the minds of the ones ruling these Arab kingdoms in the Persian Gulf, because they're really just puppets of the West. They were put in place precisely because they serve this purpose. They are just puppets operating gas stations for the British and the Americans, sadly, and they do not reflect the will of the people. If they did, this wouldn't happen in the first place. There would be no normalization. It's just by coercion, whether it's diplomatically or holding aid over someone's head, like with the Egyptians, or other means that they are able to get this through. But it certainly doesn't reflect the will of the people. The best thing to do, though, is to express outrage. Everybody should be outraged at what's happening during Ramadan, during these attacks, and otherwise.
Now, Richard, you mentioned that you are a Syrian Christian. There wouldn't have been much of a future for you in Syria if the Western governments that supported the ISIS and Al-Qaeda and the alphabet soup of Islamist extremism, if they had actually come to power in Syria. And for a historical moment, it looked as if they might do so. But for the fortitude of the Syrian Arab army and its allies, principally Russia, but also Iran and its allies in Lebanon, but for them, the black flag of ISIS would be fluttering over the capital city of Damascus. Now, making the point I made earlier, that my enemy's enemy, you know, isn't always your friend. Sometimes your enemy's enemy is worse than your enemy. And we tried so hard to overthrow the government and the Syrian Arab Republic, even though we knew that the people that we'd be putting in power would be worse, far, far exponentially worse than any criticism that could be made of the government in Damascus as at present. But they failed. Are they still continuing, or have things largely returned to normalcy in Syria?
Yeah, you're absolutely right, George. So, you know, my father's British, but my mother's Syrian Christian, and I was born in Damascus, and I'm very familiar with how the country is. You know, there is a real harmony, a religious harmony, an ethnic harmony. There's too many religious and ethnic groups to count. And there is real coexistence. I don't say tolerance, coexistence and love for one another. You know, Christians are a minority in Syria. I have no reason to say this unless it were true, and it is. And I think that's a beautiful, fragile thing that the West and their allies in the Saudi Arabia and Turkey and Israel have really tried to destroy. It's very heartbreaking because it's a rare thing to have so many different religions and ethnic groups living together in such harmony. It's very beautiful. And they attacked the social fabric of Syria. And I really pray that this is still, that it's not been imperiled too much, that we can still recover it and keep it and hold on to it. Because you really took the words right out of my mouth. If Iran and Russia and Hezbollah hadn't come in to help the Syrian Arab army, the black flag of ISIS would be flying over Damascus. This is a fact. You know, the district in Damascus, Jobar, which is, I mean, you're basically almost in the center of Damascus. It borders a Christian area, right? And you had, I've spoken with my cousins. They can hear these terrorists at night chatting. That's how close they were. And I don't think people understand this. They think that it's a game. It's some sort of a Russian talking point or whatever, nonsense they want to say. It's not. This is the truth. It was that dire. It was that close. And I should highlight one thing, that these groups, they are really not representative of Islam. They actually, the ones that they kill the most are other Muslims, ironically, right? So they're really persecuting both minorities and other Muslims and just doing the bidding of the West. And right now we are seeing pockets of ISIS resurfacing in places like Palmyra. And even if ISIS doesn't come back in the same form as before, we shouldn't forget that in northern Syria and Idlib, you still have tens of thousands of fighters. You have 5,000 Uyghurs, which the U.S. removed from their list of terrorist organizations, funnily enough. You've got all of these battle-hardened jihadists that were taken to Idlib in the green buses and that are basically amassing there for a very big battle that's yet to come. And unfortunately, a lot of civilians will pay the price for that. And these groups have received funding from Saudi Arabia, from Turkey, Israel, the US, the UK. And I don't think they will be disappearing anytime soon. As a matter of fact, the Western media are trying to rehabilitate people like Jolani, who heads what is really Al-Qaeda in Syria, except they call it Hayat Tahrir al-Sham now, or HTS. And they're rehabilitating people like this. And then, of course, even if we don't see them resurge on the same in the same capacity militarily. Syria's been chopped up into 4 pieces, and it's under sanctions. There are bread lines. People cannot get fuel. They cannot get bread. And they're starving and strangling Syria this way. And this is really the scorched earth policy that Mike Pompeo put in place with Trump, that, we didn't win the war in Syria, so we're just going to let everyone starve and suffer. And it's no surprise that Joe Biden comes in, and what does he do? He keeps the Caesar Act sanctions, and he continues the maximum pressure policy, because they are not different from each other fundamentally, Democrats and Republicans. As a matter of fact, they're indistinguishable. But again, I should reiterate, hadn't the Russians and Hezbollah and Iran come in, who knows what Syria would look like today? Maybe like Libya, maybe worse, which is, again, Libya is another beautiful country that was destroyed by NATO. And people tend to forget these things. And they claim NATO's a defensive alliance. We hear that a lot today. But they've forgotten very recent history in Libya, in Yugoslavia, in Syria, conveniently so.
Richard Medhurst, thank you very much for joining us. Thank God you are here on the media scene, ever larger. Very glad that you could join us. The poll is going great guns, and it is overwhelmingly the view of the audience that the EU should pay up in rubles. I'll be right back.
There is no trick other than hard work, creativity, care, and recognizing that duty is more important than love.
The booming voice of Robert Maxwell, an arrogant man who used his publishing empire to gain him power and influence. But in this shocking account, never told before in this way, George Galloway recalls his first encounter with Maxwell.
It looked like a grizzly bear advancing towards me and punches me with these giant fists, like sides of ham, right in the solar plexus, so hard that I literally bent double.
Then, after George exposed Maxwell as a crook in Parliament, it was war.
Every one of his papers, the Daily Mirror, then following the Sunday Mirror, the Sunday People, the Daily Record, then a few days later the Sunday Mail in Scotland, even the European, which he then owned, all over Galloway.
Scottish Daily News journalist Ron Mackay was there.
Every night, presumably when he had a drink in him, he would boom over the tannoy about the cretins, the fools. The majority of the workforce believed that he would take it over and their jobs would be secure. But of course he didn't. He just disappeared.
And then...
The millionaire newspaper publisher Robert Maxwell is dead.
What really happened? Did Robert Maxwell jump, or was he pushed?
It could be that he went out to, as he did, micturate over the side of the boat. I'm with Ghislaine Maxwell in that I lean towards the murder.
This is Maxwell, the monster.
You said, what is my secret? I will let you and your viewers know what it is. I'm not attached to property. Consequently, losing or gaining it means nothing to me.
As Private Eye used to say, takes onion from pocket. Robert Maxwell, the monster, who of course begat at least one other monster, Ghislaine Maxwell, and we're waiting patiently to see what her prison sentence following her convictions for the most heinous crimes against young people will actually be. You can get that on my Patreon page. It's surprisingly popular. But you can also get chapter 3 tomorrow of my audiobook, which is an autobiography of the 1970s, because I played a part in the 1970s. I was surprisingly something in the 1970s. And if you are not fed up of the sound of my voice, go to the Patreon and catch up. Chapters 1 and 2 are there already. Chapter 3 joins them tomorrow. That's patreon.com/George Galloway. And don't forget to donate to the mother of all talk shows. It's really very important. MOATS.tv/donate and make it a recurrent donation. I've got to tell you that all of my breath over the last hour and a half has not yet had the necessary effect. So please don't delay, make your donation now. Let's go to London, where Simon wants to talk about Russia. Go ahead, Simon.
Doing George, you okay?
Yeah, good, thanks. Go ahead.
That's great. Well, the complete absurdity of this needless war, the refusal of our politicians to negotiate with Putin for peace, the dangerous supply of weapons to various far-right militia groups to fuel the conflict, the constant saber-rattling of NATO countries and their willingness to spill every drop of Ukrainian blood to provoke Russia and yet not get involved in the war themselves directly, and the subsequent threat made towards Russia, the sanctions put on Russia, are all undiplomatic and totally meaningless moves. You've said this numerous times as well. Ordinary European people who, let's face it, are being led into this, believing this nonsense, like sheep to the slaughter by their own governments, will needlessly suffer, while super-rich conglomerates who are going to get rich from this. Now, the hypocrisy gets even worse because it was laid bare this week. I don't know whether you've watched the headlines. We probably have. That Gazprom and Hungary confirmed this, that Poland and Bulgaria claimed that they've banned Russian gas and yet are buying it from Germany, who import their gas from Germany anyway. And not only that, they're paying 5 times more than they actually would from Russia. It's absurd. I think this entire thing is a joke. It's total hypocrisy. And the cost of the sanctions that Russia are going to be are being placed on Russia by the West are just going to be simply passed on to the Europeans by these guys. It's totally absurd. I also think that the entire issue of biolabs in Ukraine, the entire COVID-19 crisis, we should be questioning now rather than just blaming it on China, because I really don't believe that this virus was from China. The entire Skripal poisoning, the hard pushing of the green agenda, to ridiculous levels, I think it was all done clearly now to push us into accepting this fact that a lot of this gas is going to be cut. It's going to be very expensive, and it's been planned for years.
Well, look, I'll tell you what, Simon, you raised many issues there and very eloquently. But let me quote back to you by way of an answer the Western world's foremost intellectual, Noam Chomsky, who said in the last 48 hours, thank God, he said, there is at least one Western statesman who is pushing for a negotiated settlement of the conflict in Ukraine rather than merely pouring fuel and new weapons into it. His name, said Chomsky, is Donald J. Trump. Just imagine that. Steve is in Stockholm. Let's hear from him. Steve, welcome.
Hi there, George. Steve calling from Stockholm, and I'm a member of Sweden's Communist Party, the SKP. Now, there's a debate going on here, and I'm sure in all the Western world, about whether the conflict in Ukraine can be seen as purely an imperialist struggle between Russian capital and Western, and or whether it's to be seen, and in my opinion, I'm a communist and a socialist, both in my brain and in my heart. And I would see it not just as purely from a historical materialist point of view, obviously it's an imperialist struggle, but it's also, you can't be neutral when it comes to Nazis. When it comes to fascists and Nazis, your heart also has to have something to say. And in my opinion, you can't be neutral in a struggle against fascism, against Nazis. What's your opinion?
Well, that's a lot of that went over my head, and I'm sure over the head of much of the rest of the audience. You can't be neutral about Nazis, but you can't be neutral about NATO either, whether you're a communist, socialist, or any other kind of ist. If you're neutral about a conflict involving NATO, then you are in the realm of counting the angels dancing on the head of a pin. If something looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's probably a duck, and that's what NATO is. It is a giant imperialist duck. So if NATO invaded anywhere, I would automatically oppose it, because throughout all of my life, I have struggled, without your grasp of theory, to abolish NATO, because I knew what kind of rodent it was, an imperialist rodent. And time after time after time, I have watched this rodent attack people in Yugoslavia, in Libya, in Afghanistan, and elsewhere. I have seen, I don't need to look in a crystal ball. I can read the book. I lived through these conflicts. So any conflict, if NATO invaded Saudi Arabia itself, I would be on the side of the Saudi Arabians, because no good, nothing good can come out of NATO. It is an utterly reprehensible and pernicious organization, which has no justification on its own terms for being still in existence. It was founded, of course, long before, 5 years before, the Warsaw Pact, although most people think it's the other way around, and it has outlived the Soviet camp and the fall of the Warsaw Pact now by more than 30 years. So to hell with NATO. I will oppose anything that NATO does. I'm ready, even with my own body, to defend my own country against any aggressor, any trespasser, anyone who attacks or invades us. But NATO, that's a different subject altogether. Let's go from Stockholm to Malaga, where Jamie wants to talk about poor Julian Assange. Go ahead, Jamie.
Good evening, George. Thanks very much for taking my call. I certainly agree with what you were just saying. Well, I agree with virtually everything you say, but about NATO. And also, I'm a big fan of Richard Medhurst, so good to see him again on your program. He's quite amazing. I just wanted to say that you're probably aware of it, but last weekend in Brussels, there was an event, an amazing event organised, a concert and rally arranged in support of Julian Assange, with some incredible speakers. And I was lucky enough to be there. In fact, I went to England and then to Brussels, and now I'm back to Malaga again. But I participated in it, and it was an incredible event. It included some brilliant speakers like Jeremy Corbyn, Dr. Deepa Driver, who I know you know, she's been on your program. The MEP, European MP Mick Wallace, also spoke. There was probably about another 10 actually on the Saturday, which was the main event in the Plaza de la Monnaie. And it was just incredible, and the number of people who attended, suddenly the square filled with people who came from Germany in buses, Germany and France and Spain and Switzerland. And it was just wonderful. The support was so strong. The atmosphere was so good. And at the end, Stella, Julian's wife, gave a very moving speech. So I was very glad to be there. I just wanted to share this with you, George. You're probably aware of it already.
Well, I'm very glad to hear it, Jamie. I was not one of the fantastic speakers at the event. As a matter of fact, I'm not a speaker at any of these big-ticket events. But that being as it is, the fact is that all across Europe and across the world, the best people have long ago fastened on to the importance of the cause of Julian Assange. You don't have to like Julian Assange. As it happens, I love him like a brother, but you don't have to. You can be like Peter Hitchens in the Mail on Sunday, a right-wing and very conservative figure who explicitly doesn't like Julian Assange, but is doing more to try and stop the extradition of Julian Assange to the United States than any of the so-called left-wing, so-called progressive journalists who once feasted on the dripping roast of WikiLeaks stories, Julian Assange's broken stories. So I'm very glad indeed that you had Mr. Corbyn over to Brussels for the rally. I know, of course, Dr. Deepa very well, and many of the other speakers too. I'm not invited to any of these things, but I have been speaking till I'm hoarse in support of Julian Assange. And I will do so for as long as God gives me breath, or until Julian Assange's freedom is guaranteed. I don't take offence easily. Thanks, Jamie, for that. Let me take a short break to wet my whistle, then calls right up to 9 o'clock. Be right back.
The airwaves. This savannah is a rigid dichotomy of fact and fiction. As Fisher says, the Twitter sphere where the slightest misjudgment can spell being cancelled. One species rules over the airwaves through its ability to adapt and survive in even the harshest environments. The George Galloway. The top cat in these parts, it is mostly active on Sunday evenings in Britain and mid-afternoon in the United States. It seldom roars during the day. Most notable for its wide variety of headdress, it protects these parts from the mainstream media. You can catch this fine specimen on the mother of all talk shows. Don't pick a fight with it. They've been known to bite back.
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
I'm frequently astounded by the metrics of this show, which seem to grow exponentially. I've just been told by our director that last week we had 2,033 calls to the show. We didn't get anything like that in, but we got as many in as we can. And I want to squeeze as many in this week as we can. So let's go to Chicago, the Windy City, where Nada wants to talk about Poland. Go ahead, Nada.
Good evening, number one. First of all, it's a pleasure talking to you, and thank you very much for taking my call. It's always a privilege to talk to you. My question to you is, with your expertise in Europe and Eastern Europe, there is a rumor going around that the Polish might do some kind of a military exercise and possibly thinking of going into Western Ukraine as a peacekeepers or something like that. I know Putin said that he will, anybody gets involved, he will strike like lightning. So if these troops get into Western Ukraine, my understanding they'll become a, legitimate target. And let's say Putin wipe all these Polish military out. That's considered, they are part of NATO. What do you think will happen?
Well, one of two things, which are diametric opposites. Donald Coulter raised this very issue in the interview earlier than in the show. At least 1 million Poles, most of them Jewish, but not all of them Jewish, were murdered by the Western Ukrainians in the Holocaust in Western Ukraine. Prior to the Holocaust. Cities like Lvov and Odessa, for that matter, were melting pot miracles of humanity. In fact, the majority of the people in Lvov, nowadays called Lviv, try typing it into your search engine, were not Ukrainian at all. The majority of people in Lvov were Poles, and many of them Jewish Poles, before the Holocaust. So there is an historic claim to parts of Western Ukraine by Poland, which has never been relinquished. You never hear about that. It's all plucky little Poland and all that. But they have their share of imperial conquest and imperial loss that they wish to recover. On top of that, Nada, there's a Hungarian claim, a Hungarian claim on another part of Western Ukraine, the so-called Carpathian Ukrainians that hanker for a return to the motherland in Hungary. So if Poland were to effectively seize, under the guise of peacekeeping, its former colonial property in Western Ukraine, I have no doubt that Hungary would do the same. I don't even want to go into the issue of Transnistria, which is a breakaway from Moldova, which is a breakaway in turn from Romania. Confused you would be if I got too deeply into all that. There's two ways that Russia might react. One is, as you say, to strike a NATO member which has entered Ukrainian territory in the middle of a war between Russia and Ukraine. And that would bring us to the brink, over the brink, of a general European war, and one which involved NATO, undoubtedly. But there's another potential Russian reaction to it, which is what you might call the shrug, the partridge shrug. Well, what does it matter to us if in the western part of Ukraine, in which we have no compatriots, in which we have no dog in the fight, what does it matter to Russia if Poland steals some of Ukraine's territory to its west, if Hungary steals some of Ukraine's territory to its west? That's, in my view, the more likely Russian response. Nader, thanks for that great call. Richard's in Manchester on the local elections. Go ahead, Richard.
George, thank you ever so much for taking my call. It's an absolutely brilliant show, and I wish I had the brain power that you have, George, to absorb it all and give it all out from my mouth to my friends when I talk, because I forget most of the things now I'm an old man. But I was just looking today at the fact that...
Don't worry. Look, Richard, I've forgotten Partridge's first name. Alan Partridge. Alan. I'll need to remember it next time. Go ahead, Rich.
Yeah. Pelosi and Adam Schiff are at this moment in time in the Ukraine, playing up to Zelensky and telling him what a wonderful... I saw her pontificating today.
Well, I hope they stocked up on. The booze.
probably, George. But she's got enough money to buy her.
She's better before lunchtime, you know.
She's got enough money to buy 10 breweries. That woman, she's poisonous. But she's obviously taken Joe's place because he can't even go to the toilet himself, and he's in a really bad way. It don't concern me. I just wonder what on earth is going to happen to the country, because we can't bring Clinton back to take, although she will try because she's that sort of a woman. And you've got Blair over here trying to get back in with the EU and using Scotland over it. The words just fail me about what's happening, and I hope that the people will know about it. I wanted to ask you, if I could as well, about the local elections in Scotland, George. I have a feeling that Mrs. Napoleon up there he's going to take that as a barometer. If she gets, SNP councillors all over the place, which is what she's hoping for, she might even fix the figures, if I'm allowed to say that. But if she does, then she's going to go for an independent Indy Rev 2 vote, which I've been on Twitter quite a lot about just recently. And how do you think that will go down, George?
Well, I don't think there will ever be an Indy Ref 2, at least not in my lifetime. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. In fact, Salmond and Sturgeon carried boards saying one opportunity, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Then some of them said, well, once in a generation. Well, a generation is 30 years. 30 years from 2014, you can do the maths. I'll be dead by then. So not in my lifetime. There won't be another referendum, principally because most people don't want it. And the British government would be foolhardy in the extreme to allow it. No other country allows constant attempts at secession from its territory. And it's a high time that the British government introduced legislation, copper-bottomed, copper-fastened, which essentially preserved the unity of this island, which is what the people voted for decisively by 55 to 45, not even 10 years ago. So it depends in part on the resolve of the British state. It astounds me that the British government is more interested in the border between Belarus and Poland than it is our own border, whether that's along the English Channel or a border which might be conjured forth across the England-Scotland border. We spend hundreds of billions on defending our country abroad against people who are no threat to our country, and spend nothing on defending the territorial integrity of Great Britain. It makes no sense at all. And when I say spend nothing, it's worse than that, Richard. We actually allow the BBC, which stands for British Broadcasting Corporation, to be a Trojan horse for separatism on the dime of the BBC licence payers, the overwhelming majority of whom are in England and Wales. Go figure. The BBC forces you to pay them for a British Broadcasting Corporation, but BBC Scotland, which is virtually unwatchable, I must tell you, from an artistic point of view, televisual point of view, it is grotesque. It makes Neighbours look like a Hollywood production. But it is a Trojan horse, a ramp for separatism, for Scottish nationalism. It's cringe-inducing, toe-curlingly cringe-inducing, and all done on the dime of something called the British Broadcasting Corporation. Thanks, Richard, for allowing me to get that off my chest. Brian is in Bexhill, on the suburbs of London. Wants to talk about Russia. Go ahead, Brian.
How are you doing, George? Very nice to speak to you. Can you hear
Thanks.
me?
Yes, go ahead, bro.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for representing what you do in free speech and all that, and having a sensible voice there that people at least can listen to, apart from what we hear in this Parliament. I wanted just to ask you, it's like, we see these puppet governments in here, it's like Boris, we see Trudeau. Who's in charge of these guys? I mean, they're not really fit enough to run a country, are they, really? Boris Johnson, say we vote them in. Are they representing the people, or is it the monarchy that's in charge of them?
No, it's definitely not the monarchy. It's a permanent state that we have, sometimes called the deep state, which ensures that essentially the same policies, apart from tuppence halfpenny on the or off the rate of this or that, are followed by the governments, whoever they are. That's self-evidently true in the United States. It's true in the United Kingdom, and I'm pretty sure it's true in Canada also. Trudeau's supposed to be a liberal. In fact, he's a tyrant. But he's a tyrant that is accepted by that permanent state and the allies of that permanent state in neighbouring countries and indeed throughout the Anglosphere, because liberal or not, his tyranny achieves the desired results. And the desired results are common throughout the so-called Western world, and certainly prevalently present in what I call the Anglosphere, which is heaving back into view. Who knew that in 2022, Australia, New Zealand, Britain, America and Canada would be with their Israeli ally, they call it Five Eyes, it's really 6 pairs of eyes, because although Israel's not a part of the Anglosphere, it is very closely aligned with those 5 parties. And they think they can rule the world, even though they're not even 10% of the world's population. Still less are they the international community, even though their children are 3% of the children of the world. They think they can go on calling the shots to the people of India, of China, of Russia, of Iran, of Brazil, of South Africa, of all of the Arab and Muslim world. They think they can go on calling the shots. Well, they've got another think coming. That's the truth, Brian. They've got another think coming. And that think has already arrived, I think. Last word to you, Brian.
One thing I seen when Boris Johnson, when they all met at that summit in Cornwall, and he says that we are going to do things in a more feminine way. And I thought to myself, what does that mean? It was odd. You know, it was strange. How can this
feminine way? I didn't hear him say that. Lock up your daughters if Boris Johnson's involved in it. That's for sure. And lock up your sons if some of the others are involved in it. Brian in Bexhill, thanks very much indeed. There's a lot of social media coming in. I'm not able to read you any right at this minute, but I will in the final hour. Keep it coming in, because even if I can't read it out on the air, I promise you it is read by me, by my missus and by other volunteers after the show. And it helps us get the temperature, the temper of the country, at least the sensible part of the country that watches MOATS on a regular basis. You can email us, by the way, not just tweet. You can email us at onair@moats.tv. Now, after the break, of course, we've got some important guests, 2 of the very most important intellectuals, one in Europe and one in North America. Elijah Magnier is a font of wisdom. He is the voice of sanity on the European continent. If he was in charge of the European political circus, it would be very much more edifying than it currently is. And lastly, but not least, Jackson Hinkle, one of my favorite US correspondents, who is really making a very big impact now on media and on politics in North America. The next poll is one I never thought I'd hear myself saying. Is Johnny Depp an innocent victim? Yes or no? Well, I mean, apart from the fact that he seems to be drunk most of the time, apart from the fact that he undoubtedly has a taste for the Colombian marching powder, neither of which is ever going to endear him to me, it is kind of beginning to look like Johnny Depp is the victim. I don't know about innocent, but the victim. Is Johnny Depp an innocent victim? Yes or no? The first poll has closed now, and it has overwhelmingly gone the way of the ruble. So, coming up now is the news with Elliot King, and the first call after the break is Robert in Dunfermline. Let me tell you that in the final hour, I'm going to have to push you to donate. I don't want to do a Bob Geldof. I don't like to swear on air, but I will if I have to, because it's just not coming in. And if it isn't coming in, then we won't be going out for very much longer. So there it is there on the screen, moats.tv/donate. Or donate, as many people are, in that fancy YouTube super comment thing, super chat. That's what you call it. Alan Partridge. Alan, I'll be right back.
The United Nations is conducting a safe passage operation for civilians from the besieged Azovstal steelworks in the Ukrainian city of Mariupol. The evacuation began on Friday and is being conducted with the International Committee of the Red Cross, Russia and Ukraine. Abreu said the convoy arrived at the steelworks on Saturday morning. He described the situation regarding the evacuations as very complex. He added that no further details could be released so as to not yet jeopardise the safety of evacuees still making the journey. The move was also confirmed by the International Committee of the Red Cross on Sunday afternoon. Food prices will keep rising and stay higher for quite some time due to the high cost of raw materials, according to Asda's chairman. Lord Rose, who sits on the supermarket chain's board, said many families struggling with the costs of living crisis are going to suffer, although retailers will try to keep the costs down. Pressures on prices include the war in Ukraine and a resurgence of COVID in China, the Conservative peer said. Oil and gas prices were already rising rapidly before Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but the war has pushed prices up further. In turn, this ramping up raw material costs for manufacturers and retailers, including for meats like chicken and staples such as pasta, with the price hikes being passed on to consumers. Co-op Chief Executive Steve Morrells agreed, saying that chicken could become as expensive as beef due to the war in Ukraine. The Bank of England expects price inflation to hit 8% this spring. However, Business Secretary Kwasi Kwarteng said inflation would not necessarily be long-term. Closing the UK's Parliament bars in a bid to tackle a culture of sexual misconduct on the estate would be excessively puritanical, Kwasi Kwarteng has said. The Business Secretary said that despite concerns regarding excessive drinking taking place on the Parliament estate, the bars should not be closed. He also admitted that the scheme to deal with sexual misconduct allegations in Parliament, which was set up in 2018, isn't working sufficiently well. It comes after Conservative MP Neil Parry said he will resign after admitting to watching pornographic film in the House of Commons twice. He claimed that the first time was accidental after looking at tractors online, but that the second was a moment of madness. Microsoft billionaire Bill Gates has warned there is a way above 5% risk that the world has not seen the worst of the COVID pandemic. The tech mogul and philanthropist said he did not want to sound doom and gloom, but warned there was a risk even more transmissive and even more fatal variants could emerge. He said that the risk of this happening is way above 5%. It is not the first time he has made such a prediction. In December 2021, he warned his millions of Twitter followers to brace themselves for the worst part of the pandemic, having previously cautioned in 2015 that the world was not ready for the next pandemic. US President Joe Biden has resumed the tradition of speaking at the annual White House Correspondents' Dinner after a 6-year presidential hiatus. He is the first leader to speak at the event, where the president faces friendly mocking in front of an audience of journalists since 2016. It was cancelled for 2 years due to the pandemic and was boycotted by Donald Trump when he was in office. Comedian and The Daily Show host Trevor Noah headlined the event. Biden addressed the fact that he's the first president to attend the event since President Trump. "This is the first time a president has attended the dinner in 6 years," he said. "It's understandable. We had a horrible plague followed by 2 years of COVID." The president also faced his share of roasts. Noah told Biden, "Ever since you've come into office, things are really looking up. Gas is up, rent is up, food is up, everything." The family of Paul Rusesabagina, the subject of Oscar-nominated film Hotel Rwanda, have filed a $400 million lawsuit in the United States over his alleged abduction and torture. He was sentenced to 25 years for terrorism by a Rwanda court last year in what supporters called a sham trial. His family say the Rwanda government lured him from the state of Texas, where he was living in Al-Aqsa exile, back to Rwanda. He is credited with saving some 1,200 people during the 1994 genocide. In a statement, Rusesabagini's family said that the $400 million sought in compensation will grow every day that Paul is held in captivity. The head of Guinea's military government has announced the country will return to civilian rule after a 39-month transition period. Speaking on television, Colonel Mamadi Doumbouya said the proposal would now be put to Guinea's parliament. His army ousted the elected president in a coup last year, a move many Guineans initially welcomed. But there has been growing discontent as the military junta failed to hand over power to civilian rule. The announcement came after the regional bloc of West African nations, ECOWAS, said last Monday as the deadline for the army to give its timeline or face immediate sanctions. A guide listing 37 different gender terms and sexual identities has been issued to police officers and staff in a British force to help them when dealing with members of the public. Norfolk Constabulary documents named the Plus in LGBT explains current terminology alongside a picture of a gender-bread person, a play on gingerbread man. Critics called it a complete waste of taxpayers' money. Some of the terms relating to sexuality, such as questioning or asexual, are self-evident, but others will be new to most, such as gynosexual, someone who is attracted to the feminine gender presentation, and grey asexual, a person who experiences attraction rarely. Norfolk Police declined to say whether it had produced the guide itself or had obtained it from another organisation. And finally, Kylie Minogue and Jason Donovan are returning to the long-awaited Australian TV soap opera Neighbours for its finale after more than 30 years away. They will resume their roles as characters Scott Robinson and Charlene Mitchell in the fictional Melbourne suburb of Erinsborough. They return to Ramsay Street comes after it was announced that the show will end this summer after 37 years. The pair were a favourite with viewers before their departure in the 1980s. Sharing a message on the show's official Twitter account, executive producer Jason Herbison said, "Scott and Charlene are the ultimate neighbours couple, and it would not feel right to end the show without them." That's all your news for now. I'm Elliot King.
George Galloway, and the mother of all talk shows. Join us at the College of Knowledge, where there are no tuition fees.
I am determined to get Kylie and Jason to Moscow for a Russian relaunch, a revamp of the Neighbours. Maybe Belarus might host it. Not that I'm ever going to see Russia again. I'm never going to work again, thanks to all of this. Although I did get a small gig on GB News last night, and the video of it is kind of worth watching. Now look, it's going really well, the YouTube click on Super Chat. You can donate any amount that you want in any currency that you like. Except rubles, I guess. Just click on Super Chat. So if you're watching on YouTube and the majority of you nowadays are, then go please to Super Chat. And that way you donate to keeping the show going and get your comment prioritized and read. The Johnny Depp poll has also really taken off. I was skeptical about that, but the editor is kind of down with the kids, and he was sure that Johnny Depp, Amber Heard, is becoming a thing in the wider public consciousness. So is Johnny Depp an innocent victim? A, yes. B, no. On Twitter, it was overwhelming. 83% so far say yes. And on YouTube, 76% say yes. And on Telegram, 80% say yes. Now, if I could pick a replacement for the various drunkards and thieves that run the European Union, I'd pick Elijah Magnier. Elijah is the wisest man in Christendom, at least in the European part of it. And I'm glad to say he joins us now. And maybe, Elijah, you can explain how it is that the European public is not only permitting, but apparently enthusiastically cheering on the destruction of their own economies and their own standard of living. I thought that we were supposedly an educated people, the Europeans. Explain.
Hello, George, and thank you for having me. We are educated people, and we have been gathering this education since many centuries. However, the problem of Europe is we are colonialist, and we started since after the first crusade in 1096, and then it came the Portuguese, the Spanish, the French, the Hungarian, everybody came, and in Europe there is a mentality of being a colonialist. However, in Eastern Europe, they've been under the control of colonialism. And now we find ourselves under the US colonialists, and we have the full control of the Americans over our security and above all on our economy. What we are doing today in Europe is we are really committing suicide. We're taking decisions after decision against not only the will of the European population, but also against the European interest and the interest of the leadership. What we see between Russia and Europe, there have been a very close partnership, particularly on economy and energy. Today, we hear Germany saying that if I give up on the Russian gas, that will cost me $220 billion. We hear the French saying that they're going to pay in 3 months an additional 17 billion euro as a difference of price of gas. We hear people screaming, prices going up, and we only understand that there is a war in Ukraine and that there are sanctions that we have imposed, initially on ourselves, publicly on Russia, but that is not only a boomerang effect hitting us, but is really, starting from the start, is hitting the heart of Europe. However, we still hear the European leaders taking decisions saying next week we are going to increase the sanctions. On the other hand, we hear the Germans saying we want the Russian gas, we want to deal with Russia, we want to lift the sanction as soon as there is a ceasefire. But then we hear the Americans saying that we don't mind having a ceasefire in Ukraine, talking on behalf of the Ukrainians. We hear the Americans blocking and suspending the gas line that comes from Russia to Europe. We hear the Americans increasing their troops in Europe and establishing 150 nuclear bomb on European continent. For which reason we need all that? We're not at war with anybody. But it's a good lesson for Europe that has been colonizing other population and other countries to be colonized today by the US, and be aware that the US is exerting its dominance over Europe, the only part that is totally obedient, in the hope that President Emmanuel Macron comes out in one piece, which is doubtfully, after the legislation election. So we are in a situation that Europe is becoming poorer and poorer by our own doing, and the Americans looking at us and saying, my own interest is to impose my dominance on the richest continent, that is Europe.
Now, of course, there's a spectrum, Elijah, in all of this, as in everything in life. Britain would be probably at the worst end of it. We've just sent 8,000 soldiers, and bear in mind that the entire British Armed Forces would fit into a provincial football stadium. Villa Park is the analogy I often give. I'm talking Army, Navy and Air Force, all of them in one stadium, not Wembley Stadium, in a provincial stadium in Birmingham. We're sending 8,000 new soldiers to Finland, a neutral country which is not a member of NATO, but which is helpfully a stone's throw, literally, from Finland to St. Petersburg, Russia's second biggest city. The rulers of Britain, including a particularly obtuse Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, the least qualified Foreign Secretary I'm sure that we have ever had, she was warning China in the week. Britain warning China about what it must do and must not do. France would appear to be the other end of that spectrum. The French people, as always, are the first to react. And Macron has serious pressure, not just from the left and the right in the legislative elections that are imminent, but on the street. A friend of mine, Naila, has just sent me a video of the French people revolting in Paris in significant numbers, and of course the usual brutal CRS response. What about elsewhere in Europe? There's no Britain and there's no France. Do the rest fall somewhere in between?
Well, first of all, in the UK, they like to say that we punch above our weight. And what they do is they're taking the leadership ahead of all the European continent, speaking in the name of the continent, even if they are no longer part of the European Union, and making sure that the Americans can hear what they are saying, that they are the avant-garde of the battle against Russia. Secondly, Macron is in difficulty today. This is why the Americans are taking over, because Germany is feeling on its own, and France had the presidential election with a president that won with 27% on the first round only, and on the second round with 58, with the reason why he got the 58 is only because people did not want to vote for Marine Le Pen, not because they want him, and not because they like to see him back again. And as I said previously, people are waiting for the end of the election to go in the street and manifest against Macron, even those who voted for him. And until 12 to 19 of June next month, we won't have any reaction from France opposing the US doing in Europe or trying to look after the European interest. This because there are the legislative elections, and because Macron is not going to have the majority and will need to form a coalition with the leftist or perhaps some of the right wing. So he is not in a strong position. This is why he's delegating most of his power in relation to what's happening in Ukraine, to the European community here in Brussels. And the European leaders who have no power whatsoever, but to speak exactly in the name of the US interest and against the interests of the European population. We're talking about hundreds of millions of people who disagree with their leaders and what they are saying to Russia and how they are behaving with Ukraine, that basically Ukraine is not the decision maker, but is Victoria Nuland, the Assistant Secretary of State in the US. So this is the situation we are in. People manifest in the street because they are against what's happening, because they are against the increase of prices, because of the increase of price of gas and gasoline. Food is going to a price that have never been seen here in Europe. And I don't think people will be able to hold on for very long. Now there is a complaint everywhere about the financial situation, and people will, at a certain point, react against their leader and the decision leaders are taking. Now, when this is going to happen, so far there is a war in Ukraine. Yes, the first propaganda war was won by the US. Now there is a strong feeling, an anti-Russian strong feeling. However, the situation is turning now, and there are many voices saying, well, why don't Ukraine sign a deal of neutrality with Russia and the US stop exerting its influence over the European continent? On the other hand, the Americans have managed to inject some fear in the head of a number of the population I talked to, and they are afraid that Russia may expand this occupation beyond Ukraine, which is not true because people don't know what is the origin of the crisis, and that the origin of the crisis said it exactly Bill Clinton in his recent article that he published at The Atlantic by saying against all the advisors, he worked on expanding NATO and prepare himself to confront Russia. This is the real reason behind everything is happening. It is the US will impose on Europe. It is Europe being colonized by the Americans today.
Lastly, and I'm grateful for your time, Elijah, as always, what about Germany? Here we have a situation where the German labor unions remain powerful, and the German employers in a mighty manufacturing country are united in saying that these sanctions are going to destroy our economy. And very quickly, fantastic increases in the prices of essentials already. The government of little soldier Schulz and his toxic green allies was scarcely from the beginning in a secure parliamentary situation. Can the German government really survive the enmity of both the employers and the employed as the German economy begins to grind to a halt?
This is a very good question. The problem in Europe is we have a country like, I've seen the president of North Macedonia the other day talking on a television, on an interview, with the flag of his country and next to it the flag of NATO. So you have a country with 1 million or 1,080,000 inhabitants or 2 million speaking in the name of 65 million or 55 million people like in Germany or France. The problem is that the Americans have discovered and imposed Eastern Europe that was under the Warsaw Pact with the Soviet Union, and they have taken all these countries under their wings. And today we hear Poland saying, I don't want to pay in ruble the gas that I'm taking in Russia, and I don't need it. But then Poland goes and take the gas from Germany. That is exactly the same gas, and Germany needs to pump 5 times extra to supply Poland that is having a show off just to flex its muscle for nothing, and yet still taking the Russian gas. So we have all these countries, the 27 countries that form the European Union, speaking as a majority in the name of the major country like Germany and France, and a little bit Italy and Spain. However, Germany today is left on its own. Germany needs France to stand by it, to support it, as the two biggest countries in Europe that can stand against the Americans. Merkel, the Chancellor Merkel did that during the era of Donald Trump. And Macron had more courage to stand against the US will and contested decisions that were incompatible with the interests of the European Union and the European continent. Today, until the end of the legislation election in France, Germany is on its own. It can't face all the Eastern European on one side, and what the Americans are doing, exerting its hegemony on some of the smaller Western European countries. Germany is suffering a lot today. France is suffering, Belgium is suffering, Spain is suffering, but Germany is supposed to be one of the two leaders that are leading Europe, is left alone today to face the Americans, and is not capable, as you rightly said, with the Green Party, to face the Americans and to take the right decisions. And the right decision is what the Germans try from time to time to tell us. They don't want to keep the sanction on Russia. And what the Americans did as a last point is to establish a military operational room in Germany to compromise Germany and any attempt to establish good relationship with Russia. However, bringing 40 nations in Germany to support Ukraine and organize the intelligence information to Ukraine and the supply of weapons to Ukraine from Germany is a way to tell Germany that we are going to break your will if you don't abide by our diktat or our objective to try and defeat Russia and Ukraine, which is an impossible task that is not going to happen. And what is going to happen is damaging the relationship between Russia and Germany. And this is exactly what the Americans want to do.
Elijah Magnier, as always, peerless review of the European horizon. Thanks for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. The Johnny Depp poll: is Johnny Depp an innocent victim? You can vote on my Twitter, on my YouTube channel. Please subscribe, and on my Telegram. Let's go to line one, where Robert in Dunfermline is on the line. Go ahead, Robert.
Hello, George. It's been a while since I spoke to you, just before the start of the war, actually, when you were saying there will be no war, and I said, yes, there will.
I bet my house on it, Robert.
Well, I said...
And luckily, nobody took me up on it. It shows what I know about Russia's intentions.
Well, I'm only phoning.
So much for me being a Kremlin agent.
I'm only phoning to say you owe me a house.
You didn't take me up on it.
I might have done.
Go ahead,
okay.
Rob.
I actually set my alarm to wake me up a couple of hours after when I thought the war would start at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I was bang on. It started at 4 o'clock in the morning. I set my alarm to wake me up a couple of hours later to see if anything was on the news, sort of thing. And I don't know if you remember, but at the time I said to you, yeah, well, we need a war. And I went on to say that Putin will want the whole of eastern Ukraine, and the Dnieper River would be a very good border. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I do recall.
Okay.
I do recall. Yes.
Well,
and you may very well have been absolutely bang on.
Yes. Well, it's coming to the realisation now of the general public, I think, and the so-called experts in Washington and Whitehall, that it's not just the Donbass that Putin is interested in. He wants the half of the country and the best soils in the world, obviously. And that's what he's doing.
That would give these independent republics, or if they joined the federation, perhaps alongside Belarus, in a Novorussia, it would give Russia the most fertile land in Ukraine.
Yeah, great.
The eastern part is also the only industrialized part. And the river is a decent boundary line. That might well happen. Last word to you, Rob.
They're already at the river, from what I can glean. They're on the right-hand side of the river, if you look at the map, already. So the I keep saying Kiev, but it's Kiev now, isn't it? The attack on Kiev.
You say Kiev, I say Kiev. Let's call the whole thing off.
Yeah, I call it Kiev anyway. That was merely a diversion militarily. There was no serious intention to take Kiev. It was a diversion to draw the Ukrainian troops away to defend on the north side from Belarus, basically, while the military gained ground on the east of the river. So what we've ended up with, basically, is what I said before, the whole of the east and the corridor up to Donbass. I think what's going to happen in the future...
Yep. I think, look, I can, it haunts me, God forbid that I ever become unwell. I'm remarkably healthy in all the circumstances, because who's going to fill in for me on the MOATS? Maybe it's you, Robert, in Dunfermline. Thanks for your wisdom. On line 2 is Peter in Canada. Go ahead, Peter.
Hello, George. How are you doing there?
I'm good. George? Go ahead, sir.
Are you there?
Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, listen, I just wanted to tell you...
Yes, go ahead, sir.
You've heard about the Rolling Thunder here in Canada?
Yes, that's the trucker thing?
Yeah, it's a biker thing following up for the truckers there. It just happened this weekend in Ottawa there. Thousands of people arrived for the big protest.
Is it big?
It was big. It was big.
Is it big?
JT put out 800 RCMP officers to take control.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyways, no, I just wanted to tell you about, you're talking about Europe there and the crush from the rising prices and everything. Canada here is going through the same thing, of course, and the new McCarthyism is just going like crazy, of course. You don't want to say the wrong thing about if you support Russia or China these days in Canada. The true feeling of racism has come out, right here now. Are you there?
Yeah, and thank God he's a liberal, Peter, or God knows how tyrannical he would be. Thanks for that call. Sorry about the delay in the line. Jackson Hinkle, right after this break.
Let's play a game and I'll ask you yes or no questions. Ready? Okay then. Sick and tired of hearing the same old voices on the wireless? Are you looking for an alternative opinion to the mainstream media? Do you have a thing for a Scottish accent? If your answer is no to one or more of these questions, then you need the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway. Listen, watch, and share the fastest growing political program in the world.
It's for you, sir. Where's the cheese pizza, Robinson? Come on, what are the public paying you for? Oh, and get another virgin colada while you're there. There's a good chap. Oh, who's ringing the old burner phone? Hello? How did you get this number, Ghislaine? No, that's impossible. I can't possibly fly to New York. Why? Our mummy's grounded me. Oh, yes. She's threatened to cut off my allowance, you know. Yes, I know it comes from the public, but she holds the strings. Oh, I've got to go. My pizza will be here any minute. I'm not sweating, you're sweating. Ghislaine, don't call again. Robinson, sir, come here with that moist towelette. It's getting a bit hot for my liking. Here? Where am I?
Welcome to St. Peter's Gate, my son.
Is this one of that Hillary's tricks, that devil?
Be still, my son. The Clintons cannot hurt you here. You are safe with me in heaven.
Oh, heck. Knew I shouldn't have taken Bob's homemade vaccine. Oh, Lord have mercy, I am not worthy.
Before you pass on, you may ask any question you desire.
Anything?
With my omniscient knowledge, I can tell you anything you wish to know.
Well, Lord, you gotta tell me. All-powerful creator of this universe, before you judge me, I've been searching for answers my whole life.
Yes, my child.
I have to know. Who shot JFK?
Another one. It was a lone gunman by the name of Lee Harvey Oswald. He was not a government agent, and there was no second shooter on that grassy knoll in Dallas.
My God! This goes higher up than we thought!
You are listening to the mother of all talk shows with George Galloway.
Well, this super chat lark is quite a good thing, you know, and I'm very grateful to everyone who's super chatted me. I'll read some of them out now, and all of them, I promise, be the first things I read after the show. Blatant says, Johnny Depp is the bravest man on the planet. Well, I can't possibly agree to that. That's hyperbole on an amazing level. But as I indicated earlier in my own response to the poll, he definitely would appear to have been the victim of an injustice and to have been judged unfairly. So to that extent, Blatant, I'd be voting yes on our poll, which is still running, by the way. You can vote on my platforms on it. HLM says, your wisdom demonstrated through your commentary is priceless. Thank you very much indeed, HLM. Took me a long time to be as wise as I am now, but I'm glad my missus heard you say that. Steve Feher, again, very grateful to you, Steve, says, keep it going, George. Yeah, I mean, I will, as long as it's physically, financially possible. We'll keep this going, and I hope within the next month or two to have a sponsor, in which case we won't be needing your financial support. Damas, again, thank you, says, George, today we are all Palestinians. Well, you and me, and many others, but unfortunately not all Palestinians. And L.W. Paradis, again, thank you, says, Depp is a diversion. Whether he was the bigger victim is relevant to divorce, not defamation. Who even read Heard's article? No wonder our politics is in the state that it's in. Yeah, it may just be defamation, but defamation is an important thing. I myself am involved now in a legal case against Twitter at their headquarters in Dublin, in part because the depiction of me, after I had ceased even to have a television show on any Russian media, as a Russian state-affiliated media is not just false, it's damaging. It is intended to be damaging. Otherwise, why do it? And if it is false and damaging, it is ipso facto defamatory. So whilst I'm suing on a whole number of levels, the GDPR abuse, lack of transparency, the lack of any means of appeal, also alleging defamation in that. I'll keep you posted on that case. Now, so on YouTube, click on Super Chat. You can donate any amount you want in any currency you like, except rubles. Let's not take any risks, lads, by paying in rubles. Now, radio didn't kill the video star, and my next guest proves it. He's a patriotic American. He takes a different view, radically different view, from the ruling parties in the United States, who are increasingly not just two cheeks of the same backside, but the so-called left cheek is even uglier than the cheek on the right. He is the one and only host of The Dive, and we're going to dive into US politics now with Jackson Hinkle. Jackson, thanks as always for joining us. I'm now your biggest fan on this side of the Atlantic. Let's dive first into that point. Is it a synonym that to be a patriotic American, you've got to support American empire overseas? Or is the real patriotism the demand to pay attention to the multitude of problems faced by the American people in their own country?
A great question. First, I want to say thank you so much for having me on. I'm a big fan of your show and all your work. It's a great question. I call myself a patriot because I want to make America better. And I think that we should be working as Americans to improve the lives of our neighbors and improving the standard of living in this country, right? In our founding documents of this country, we're guaranteed a set of basic rights that the government is supposed to uphold. I don't think they're doing a very good job of it. In fact, I think the Biden administration right now is trying to take away those rights. And as citizens of this country, it's our duty to uphold the government's, constitutional, promise that they will guarantee those rights to us. And if they don't, it is our duty to either alter or abolish this government. Okay, so that's why I call myself a patriot. I don't think it's that radical. And I think the only thing that is radical or extreme or delusional is for the people who are doing the most unpatriotic things imaginable, corruption in government, taking away those basic rights, or waging imperialist for-profit wars. I think those are the true people who are doing unpatriotic things, but they claim this label of patriotism, and that really frustrates me.
Yeah, I mean, un-American activities are defined always from the McCarthyite side and perspective. But in fact, the un-American activities, i.e. those activities that are harmful to Americans, are conducted by the people who align with McCarthyism. We have, though, the situation. I mean, there's a lot of political cross-dressing going on, Jackson. The sage, Noam Chomsky, has just hailed as the only statesman who is trying to bring about a negotiated end to the Ukraine war, is Donald J. Trump.
Yes, I mean, the first time I came on your show, I believe we were talking about Ukraine, and you asked me the question, if Donald Trump was president, do you think that we would be at war right now, or in a proxy war in Ukraine against Russia? And I said, probably not. I don't think so. And now, based on Trump's most recent statement on the war in Ukraine, it's very clear that he wouldn't have wanted this war. He's saying that, the number one thing that politicians and statesmen should be doing right now is advocating for peace, advocating for a peace deal, some sort of negotiation. Russia has been trying that for many, many years now, especially the last 8 years. They didn't want this war. They were backed into a corner. And truly, they had no other option. I mean, as we all know, there was an 8-year war led by these extremists on the ground in eastern Ukraine that were waging a brutal slaughtering campaign against the rebels in the eastern region of the country, or in the Donbass, right? So I think that it's incredible that Donald Trump has come out and said this. I recently had U.S. Army Colonel Douglas McGregor on my show. He was Trump's senior Pentagon advisor, and he echoed this same concern. He says, we shouldn't be involving ourselves in this situation. It's our fault as the United States that this is even happening right now. And in fact, he said if Donald Trump was president, this would be the last thing that he wanted. Yes, of course, he was oftentimes either knowingly or unknowingly deceived by these deep state figures like John Bolton or Mike Pompeo, for example. But there was many instances in which he tried to fight against them, notably in Syria. He wanted to draw down the troop levels in Syria, and a U.S. deep state Syria envoy named James Jeffries lied about the amount of troops that they were keeping in Syria and told Trump that they were drawing down the levels there. I mean, this is the type of stuff that we think of as treasonous, but those in power right now think of a patriotic duty to serve their country. I mean, it's insane, but it truly does show that there was a deep schism between Donald Trump and these deep state aligned anti-China, anti-Russia officials. Donald Trump is, I'm sure he calls himself a patriotic American, and maybe he says a lot of things that you and me don't agree with. But at the end of the day, we have to recognize that he is far more rational when it comes to a lot of these foreign policy disputes than anyone in the Biden administration right now.
Absolutely agree with that. The Democrats, is it bloodier to go on or to go our? They're steeped in blood so far in the Ukraine. It's difficult to see how the current government of the United States, short perhaps of an electoral cataclysm in November and the loss of control of the Congress, can be diverted from its current profligate, murderous course.
It's something to think about. But one thing I want to bring up is that Joe Biden's approval rating just hit 33% in a Quinnipiac poll. That's lower than Trump's approval rating ever was. And I think that a lot of Americans might not resonate with the message of the GOP or anything like that, but they understand that in this point in time, it's probably going to be a better outcome at the end of the day if we were to get at least a check or a balance on the Biden administration and Congress. That's why I think you're going to see this immense red wave sweep through the Senate and the House in the 2022 midterms, right? We're already seeing these numbers coming out showing that the Republicans are going to take a sweeping victory. And listen, I'm not a Republican. I'm not a Democrat. In fact, I've probably voted Democrat more than Republican in my life. But things are changing. There's a political realignment going on in this country. And it seems as though the only rational people in D.C. right now are some of these libertarian right-wing figures. I mean, we can look at the Squad. They were supposed to be the progressive heroes that were supposed to answer our problems and fight against the Democratic Party. AOC, Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, some of these characters. But now they're going along with everything that Nancy Pelosi and Biden wants. They're just this week, there was only 10 people who voted against sending more arms to Ukraine in this suicide mission of a war. And there was only 10 Republicans that voted against it. Every single Democrat, including the Squad, voted to send more arms to Ukraine rather than advocate for bringing about a peace proposal like Donald Trump was talking about. So it's going to be really interesting to see what happens in the coming years, really, and leading up to this presidential election. I think we can expect a huge sweep of power in the direction of the GOP, because at the end of the day, again, regardless of whether we agree with them all the time or not, they are speaking more truth when it comes to these foreign policy disputes.
I can't resist, Jackson. Where do you stand on the big Johnny Depp trial? It's getting quite a lot of publicity over here. You may or may not be surprised to know.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of publicity here as well. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, and it was so odd. Just a few nights ago, I was at a friend's house in downtown LA. It just so happened we were in one of the buildings that is of major consequence in the trial. I think it's called like the Eastern Building in Los Angeles, but everyone's talking about it. I personally haven't given it a whole lot of attention. I think it's just another bright, shiny object that the media is trying to distract us with. I mean, first it was Russiagate, then it was COVID, then it's Ukraine, now it's this. And what I do think is so interesting about this trial, and you know, Johnny Depp is accusing Ms. Heard of slanderous claims surrounding him being an alleged domestic abuser. And we know Ms. Heard's claims in the past. What I think is so interesting about this is it's causing a lot of people, at least in the United States, I don't know about where you are, but it's causing a lot of people to question our culture, question what we value, question what we think of as the pinnacle of happiness, right? Do we think that being famous and you know, now seeing what's going on between Ms. Heard and Mr. Depp as the pinnacle of happiness? I don't think so. I think that we are all recognizing the fallibility in every human, not just in our own personal lives as non-celebrities, but also in their lives as well. And the other thing I think it is causing many people to reflect on is that the world is not black and white, and we shouldn't think about any of these major mainstream media stories that they're shoving down our throats as being black and white. Again, look at Russiagate. Mueller was supposed to be the hero in the eyes of the media, and Trump was the villain. COVID, we had Fauci celebrated as the hero. Ukraine, we have Zelensky as the hero. The undemocratic, corrupt, villainous Zelensky, they told us he was a hero. Now we're seeing this transfer over to this major, private, dramatic relationship between Johnny Depp and Amber Heard. Kind of take the same routes. The media is trying to paint this as black and white, good versus bad, hero versus villain. I think a lot of people are recognizing and reflecting on this based upon our own personal struggles and our own relationships that we've had, that the world is not black and white.
Great answer, Jackson Hinkle. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the mother of all talk shows. Let's go to Jimmy in Yorkshire on that very subject, Johnny Depp. Go on, Jimmy. Where do you stand?
Hi, George. Thanks for having me on. I haven't seen any comment or heard any people. I've talked to very, feminist friends of mine. I haven't heard anyone say anything positive about Amber Heard. Everyone seems to be leaning much more towards the Johnny Depp side. That's just my experience.
It's also mine, but it was once otherwise, wasn't it? I mean, in a way, what Jackson was saying there is the media like to paint things as black and white. In this case, they seem to be painting what was formerly black as white and what was formerly white as black. I mean, in the original case in Britain, it was Depp that was the villain. Now it seems opinion has swung.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, that trial, I don't think it was televised, was it? But, I think this has definitely been a good move for Johnny Depp, even though it's not, ideal, all the things that are coming out about both of them. But, I mean, I have to say, like, Amber Heard makes Meghan Markle look like quite a genuine, kind of virtuous person, in my opinion. But she doesn't come across as trustworthy to me, really. But I just wanted to kind of...
Makes Meghan Markle... Yeah, go on.
I just wanted to ask you, like...
I better not go where I was going there.
I saved you from myself. But yeah, it seems with things like this case, and I'm not sure how much support there was for cancelling Johnny Depp back in, 2016. And things like I
think that's a very good point. I mean, his career has been completely ended, and that cannot be right.
Yeah. So where do they get all this power? These, lobbies, Me Too lobbies, trans lobbies. Like, where does all this punch come from? Like, I don't think the people, really want it. I don't think the majority of people want it, definitely. So where do they get so much power to, cancel people? Because I know there are lobbies, pushing for these types of things.
Well, get Jack Sparrow back on board. That's what I say. Jimmy in Yorkshire, thanks for that. David is in Nottingham, staying in England, on American corruption. Go ahead, David.
Hi, George. You know what? I'm so disgusted. I woke up this morning and I watched Al Jazeera report and it was on the Azov battalion that are trapped in the steelworks. And they were filmed, obviously it was their families, and the soldier filmed, he actually had a badge on the side of his arm with a picture of Adolf Hitler on it. Now, my granddad died on the last day
it's common. It's common in Ukraine, in Western Ukraine. I mean, their reading material, their swastikas, their SS insignia, their statues to their heroes, the tearing down of the statues of those that defeated Hitler, their Hitler salutes. I mean, which part of that did people miss?
No, I don't, George, honestly, I really don't know. How's the Ukraine become the world's biggest washing machine for money laundering?
Yes, and my goodness, we'll pay a high price, David, over a very long period of time on that. Thanks very much, Dave, in Nottingham. Julia Zhu says, Johnny Depp is a victim, in my opinion, like many talented and creative people. His eccentricity, possibly autism spectrum, leads to him being misunderstood. He has a heart of gold. And Jay says, agreed, and many men out there who didn't have the chance to expose the women who accused them of the same thing are finding great comfort watching this play out. Men have been under attack for such a long time, and her behaviour seems to have been encouraged a bit from the Me Too movement. So it's kind of a political issue from that sense. And Belligerent says he's not innocent, but clearly a victim. That would be my vote also. Not innocent, but clearly a victim. And Cyber Socialist says, who cares? This isn't the way to emancipate the proletariat, that's for sure. You see, your problem, Cyber Socialist, is that you ask who cares. The answer is vast numbers of working class people care. Vast numbers. It's because you're living in your cyber bubble that you could write that message to me. And Paul Milroy says, is anyone really arsed on the grand scale of things? Apologies for the language. I'd appreciate your opinion on unpaid bank holidays for the self-employed. Well, I'm self-employed and all of my holidays are unpaid, but the time does not allow me to dilate on the general issue affecting the self-employed. And Joe River says, I'm not supporting her behaviour, but not a chance, I believe, he's an innocent victim. Couple warfare in public rarely sports truth. And Elaine Ermis says, no, he's clearly abusing his ex-wife now. He's the one who wanted this trial public. She wanted it private, like most divorced people would. He's the one with more money and more popularity to hire better lawyers than her, have more fans than her, and have experts and juries biased. Signed Elaine Ermis. Let's take what will undoubtedly be the last call. That's Mike in South Carolina on Johnny Depp. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, George, how you doing? It's good to talk to you again, buddy.
And you, brother, what's your view?
I'm sorry?
What's your view on the Depp situation? Yeah. Okay. The whole world's listening. Go on, man.
I'd like to say that the coverage of Johnny Depp is viewed by me in the same way I viewed your coverage of Britney Spears, which is pretty much useless to the rest of the world. It's like one of the people said, it's a bright shiny thing to part of the bread and circuses to keep people preoccupied. But in regard to that, I was listening to the conversation that you and Jackson were having, and it's like you were actually thinking that Trump would do better than Biden has. Now, I'm no Biden fan. I think you know that. But the idea that Trump, the person who lied more than any other person ever in office and did everything he said he wasn't going to do, or didn't do anything he said he was going to do. And even when it comes to like Afghanistan, he wanted to pull out of Afghanistan, and when Biden does it, he's all against it. He's a liar. He's a narcissistic. He only cares about Donald Trump, and he would never do anything good for this country. if he was there for 20 years.
Well, a powerful and unequivocal message from Mike in South Carolina. Alas, we are out of time. It remains, though, for me to wish Eid Mubarak to all the faithful Muslims around the world who've been fasting religiously for a whole month. The crescent moon has been sighted, and it is time now to wish everyone a happy Eid. I'll see you on Wednesday at 10 p.m. London time on YouTube for The Galloway Show, or next Sunday for the mother of all talk shows.